Hello, everybody. Right. Before I start, there's two things. First of all, I've got a bit of a cough. So if I cough a lot, you'll know why. The second thing, I'm going to be flicking through a lot of slides here, but I've actually I'm going to upload an annotation for the talk onto my blog. So if you see a website and you want to know more about it, there'll be links on my blog, and I'll give you the web address in a minute. I'm going to be talking today about Liverpool blogs. Liverpool blogs is a website which you'll find out more about later, but I actually started it in 2007, and basically it's an aggregated list of all of the Liverpool blogs. But I'll tell you some more about it in a minute. I'm going to sort of be, as Alison said, I'm going to talk first about the UK blogging scene, and then I'm going to talk about sort of where Liverpool blogs came from, and then I'm going to talk about the mechanics of how, basically how the Liverpool blogs Twitter feed works, assuming I have enough time. So anyway, I thought to begin with my own blog, which is called Feeling Listless, and here it is. As Alison said, I've been running it for about 10 years. This isn't what it looks like right now, but since I took this screen cap about a week ago. But anyway, that's my blog. This was the first post I actually posted to a blog. It was in 2000. And I decided to include it because it actually demonstrates how difficult it was to put a blog together in the year 2000. If you don't read the whole thing, but somewhere in here it actually says that I actually created it on Word 2000. I really didn't know what I was doing then, so I was creating. Basically, the way this sort of began was I had a static kind of website, and I decided to try and start a blog within that website. But the whole process of doing it in Word 2000, of sort of drawing up a template and then adding the text and uploading that and then doing the next thing. Luckily, a year later, I discovered Blogger. Now, I like to joke that this was the first post to the weblog, this post about sugar babes, but actually, this was the first post to the weblog. It was a link to a BBC documentary called The Future Just Happened, and I decided to include it because actually it says a lot about sort of where sort of the internet was and sort of web communities were at the time. As it says, I'll read you a little bit. It says, anyone who sat through an episode of .comedy has a pretty good idea of how the internet is viewed by television, a frivolity, something other. It especially isn't a community, for goodness sake. Here instead was a serious view of the net, presenting it as a land of opportunity and adventure. Fascinatingly, we caught a glimpse of Google, or rather Google's headquarters, a typically mirrored building in Silicon Valley. The place was a workplace, a large workplace, who play roller hockey and basketball between flirting and eating, hundreds of people. And now look at the website. What are all these people actually doing? And that was the first post of the blog. Now, 5 years later, I actually gave an interview to a friend in El Paso, and she asked me where the blog came from, and so I decided that this was the best explanation I could give you now. And basically what happened was I was reading lots of blogs. I was reading a blog called Rebecca's Pocket, a blog called Metafilter, and basically I decided that I would start my own blog, but also because there weren't, as far as I could gather, any blogs in Liverpool. And I decided to try and do the thing that I was seeing in these American blogs, lots of links, a bit of a diary, a bit of personal blogging, but do it from a more local point of view. And then she says, I never thought the blogging was an American fad, but I guess it sort of is. And then I sort of go on to talk about sort of the first inklings I had that there was any kind of a UK blogging scene, and the blogging scene is in London. I said I think Plastic Bag was around then. Then another blog called Link Machine Go, which will become important later. And then I sort of talk about what we've already talked about. Now, the first sort of web community I ever really became involved in was a website called Metafilter, which is still going. It actually began in something like 1999. If you see on the right-hand side of the screen, it actually has a little box that says what Metafilter was like, and it's only recently clicked over to 10 years ago. Metafilter's still going. At the time it didn't, but now what's interesting about Metafilter is it's not so much an invited community, but it's a community you have to buy yourself into. You pay $5 to the people who run it in order to join, and so it means that it's more like a village, and it's a group of people who actually know each other. And as I say, as my first experience of what web communities could be like, it was a good experience because it was just like blogging later and Twitter later, in that you got to sort of know people by their username, and you got to know what they were like by the kind of comments they left, be it on politics or art or what have you. Now, the first sort of, after Metafilter, I actually started to dig around and look at sort of, well, what kind of blogs are there in the UK? And one of the users on Metafilter was a guy, his username's LMG, but he's a gentleman called Darren. He runs a blog called Link Machine Go. And if you look in the bottom left-hand corner, he has on his website this sort of blog roll of UK bloggers. Now, that is a fairly cast-iron list of what the blogs were like back in 2000. One of the features he had, although this doesn't update quite as well as it used to, is this updated UK weblogs list. Now, this was the first inspiration towards Liverpool blogs. It works similar to Liverpool blogs. It doesn't actually extrapolate the posts, but it has a list of all of the different websites, and it sort of updated whenever a new item was posted. And basically, that was the list I kind of followed, but I didn't really have an inkling of the chronology of how these things work, and I was generally just sort of tapping away sort of in isolation for years. I had a feature on my blog called Blog of the Day, where I made a point of linking to other bloggers in order to sort of try and basically get people to read my blog, but also to sort of find out what other bloggers were out there. And in a way, that became its own little community. And when 9/11 happened, we all sort of, all the people who'd been Blog of the Day on my blog, we all sort of emailed each other to see, how were we? Are we okay? Are we really affected? Is everything fine? And it wasn't until this happened that I actually realized the kind of community that had actually been happening in London in the year 2000. When Brooke McNarty sort of came out, what was really interesting was that it turned out that all of the people who were in that community that she'd actually been a part of all knew who this Belle de Jour person had been for years. It was just that none of the journalists had gone to bother to ask them. And they'd kept the secret for years as well. And that was, again, the next thing I realized about web communities is that they're so close-knit and they're so familiar with each other that they'll keep a secret like that, which I thought was amazing. And again, Darren from Link Machine Go, there he is. What he did was he set up a kind of a landmine on his, sort of a Google Whack landmine on his blog, years, sort of somewhere in the archive. And essentially the way it worked was, if somebody Googled with the speech marks around Belle de Jour and Brooke McNarty, it was like he would get a report, or I think an email saying this search has happened, and then he would be able to get in touch with Brooke and say, you've been nobbled. And that's exactly what happened, and that's why Brooke McNarty came out. It was because the Daily Mail had done that search. He contacted Brooke and said, who he hadn't spoken to in years, and she didn't know that he knew what, and she didn't know that any of these people knew who she really was, and they just worked it out from clues in the blog. And so that's why she came out in the Times. It was because Darren had contacted her, and that's all in this Guardian article here. Meanwhile, the Guardian, who were one of the primary media organisations to actually promote UK blogs, way back in 2001, did actually have this British blog competition. And again, all of the main blogs are on there. But the interesting thing about it, at least to me personally, is that I was sort of finding all this stuff out through osmosis, but it isn't until much later you actually crystallize it all in your brain and you realize what the chronology actually was, the fact that, this is what I missed, this is what I missed, this is what I missed. And one of the things I realized from looking at this British blog competition was there had been a blogger before me in Liverpool, a guy who writes a blog called Imperial Donut. This is his last post, which is from February the 2nd. I think you can see what it says. And so he'd been blogging before me. And it actually turned out there was a little miniature sort of blog community in his blog roll all those years ago that I'd completely missed out on because of the way the internet worked at the time, because it was very difficult for you to keep track of these things, actually, because there weren't these kind of community websites. The most there were blog rolls. But if you didn't, and very often, unless you actually went searching through the blog rolls and actually put time in, it was often difficult to sort of find this information out. But just to sort of as an adjunct to this, lately people have been talking about how blogging's getting a bit old hat because of Twitter, that and blogging is dropping off. And recently, this gentleman, Ben Terrace, who's mentioned in this blog post here, he's sort of trying to start a campaign to get people blogging again, which inspired this Katie Lindenman to write this very long blog post about actually what the scene was like in 2000. She talks about the updated UK weblog list. She talks about this thing called Eastern Web, which was a portal that actually listed blogs together, and that's as early as 1999. And she says it was awesome. And I've included this in the annotation simply because it's well worth reading, just because it gives you an idea of the other thing that was happening in 2000, which was blog meets, which was, bloggers getting together in pubs and going on pub crawls and meeting each other, which is very similar to what's happening on Twitter now. And this gives a list of, and essentially all of the people who are listed here are what are considered to be the old guard and the A-list of of sort of the UK blogging scene. I need a drink. Now we're getting into precursors to actually Liverpool Blogs itself. One of the precursors is London Bloggers, and that's, as it says, it's a directory of weblogs in London. Obviously it's for London bloggers, and actually it's the primary source now for information and for links to London bloggers. I've listed myself on it next to Liverpool Street. Just a way of publicising myself. Because that's the thing on the internet, you always try and sell yourself. Now, basically now we're getting into where did Liverpool Blogs come from. Now, Liverpool Blogs essentially got its idea from this weblog called The Man Chisel, which is run in Manchester by somebody called Kate Feld. Now, the reason I found The Man Chisel is because in 2005 I went to Manchester University. And whilst I was at Manchester University, I began reading a newspaper called the North West Inquirer. And the North West Inquirer had a section called the North West Blog Watch. And one of the blogs that was mentioned in the North West Blog Watch was the Man Chisel, which is how I cottoned onto it. And I managed to be mentioned in the very last issue of the North West Inquirer. There it is. And essentially what Kate Feld did is what I'm doing, which is she's created a blog roll for Manchester, listing all of the blogs in Manchester. And this is her first blog post on the subject from 2005. And as she says, this is part of my new effort to provide a really complete Manchester blog roll on the site. I've been pretty amazed and impressed by the variety of Mancunian blogs out there, but in order to find some of them, I had to do some very annoying and time-consuming searching on the web. So here it is. If you've arrived here because you're curious about who could possibly be linking to your blog, welcome. If you know any Manchester, etc., etc. I actually got in contact with Kate because I told her I was giving this talk and asked her if there was anything else she'd like to add about this to this blog post. And she says, "Hi Stu, nice to hear that you're still doing the Liverpool blogs thing. Of course, I'd be happy to oblige with the quote. I think the first quote you found sums up why I started doing it very well. To make it easier for me and my readers to find new Manchester blogs. But over time, as more people started blogging in the city, the blog roll grew, and I began writing more about these other blogs on Manchisel. Now, it feels more like the site has become a centre of a community of bloggers which flourishes both online and off. I hope this helps. Let me know if you need anything else." From Kate. Now, one of the offshoots of that is the Manchester Blog Awards, where every year it's a Manchester Blog Awards, so people nominate their favourite blogs and they have a ceremony. And that's something I'd like to look into doing in Liverpool soon. Possibly, but it's just to demonstrate that sort of the way that blogging communities have developed, and the fact that that they've decided to have this kind of award ceremony. They're actually doing it for charity, which brings us up to Liverpool Blogs, and there it is again. Essentially, the idea. Eventually, what happened was I was in Manchester between 2005 and 2006 at university. Kate made me an honorary Manchester blogger because I was spending so much time in the city. And eventually, but the thing was, I left Manchester when I graduated in November 2006. And basically, somewhere in there, I started sort of thinking about it. Well, maybe Liverpool should have something like that. Maybe Liverpool should have something like that. Eventually, what happened was me, Pete Carr over there, and Ian Jackson from the Art and Culture blog were invited to a presentation at the Fact about the Paradise Project, as it was called then. So it was Liverpool One and the stadium and all those kinds of things. The three of us were invited, presumably because we lived in Liverpool, but none of us could really work out exactly why we were invited. And I don't know whether it was because we had a conversation or somewhere along the line. I wonder whether more bloggers would have been invited if there was an easier way for whoever organised it to actually invite, to sort of find us. And so I decided, well, I think it's about time I set up Liverpool Blogs. Here's the blog post where I talk about setting up Liverpool Blogs. And it says, prompted by a conversation with Ian and Pete the other night and inspired by Kate, I've set up a new blog dedicated to highlighting Liverpool blogging scene. I've called it Liverpool Blogs. And I don't think there's anything like it in the area yet, other than a page of the Liverpool Echo covering the writers in their network. The real focus is the blog role, and actually I roughly say what Kate said in her blog post. This is the first version of Liverpool Blogs. As you can see, essentially it tries to set itself up as a blog. So it has the blogs on the right-hand side in a blog roll, and it has a weak attempt at content on the left. Because the idea was that I would be updating it like Kate, so whenever I found a new blog, I'd set up a blog post, and I'd put a new blog post in, and that's what you can see under Mike McNulty's photography there. And essentially the way I found blogs to sort of list was through web searches, was through looking at blog roles on other Liverpool blogs, and to look at this British bloggers directory, which is currently offline, but we're waiting for it to I'm desperate to come back online for various reasons. And essentially, like Kate, I listed the blogs under various subject headings like culture, food, football, news, and commentary. The problem with that is that actually it was complicated because the way that blogs are, it's quite rare that people actually stick to a single subject. So there are football blogs, there are food blogs, but a lot of basically the culture section and the news section ended up being extended way down the screen because I was just sticking them in because they kind of fitted. But Billy Roberts' psychic blog, is it culture? Is it commentary? And so eventually I decided that what I would do is get rid of all of that, and I would actually and also the problem with that system, was that it was difficult to see which blogs weren't being updated. So and obviously links were going dead, and it was difficult to follow that, and there were so many of them eventually it was difficult to do that, and I never could understand how Kate was able to manage any of this. So eventually what I decided to do was take advantage of one of the features on Blogger, which is to have a sort of chronological aggregated list. That's the configuration screen on Blogger, and essentially that's where you add the blogs to it. And so that's what we have now, and that's what I had then, which is what this list where it says 25 minutes ago, updated 55 minutes ago, an hour ago, an hour ago, an hour ago. And essentially, talking to people about the blog, what I found out was that people were actually more interested in the blog role and less interested in whatever news items I was updating, which is why I changed it to relatively recently to this format, which is the post, basically the blog role is where the blog post should be, and the news is where the blog role should be, which is quite difficult to hack around on Blogspot. How much time have I got? Am I all right? You're kidding me. Okay. Anyway.
You need to breathe sometimes.
It's nerves. So anyway. And essentially what happened was in 2009, after the first Liverpool Twestival, having talked to Pete again, because we were talking about Liverpool blogs and whatnot, and I just thought, well, it would be good to set up a Twitter feed that updated with links from all of these different blogs as a convenience for people, so that and sort of to promote Liverpool blogs in Twitter. And so I set up this Twitter feed on Twitter, and actually it's what I can gather now, this has become the primary way people consume Liverpool blogs. It's got, as you can see, well then at that point it had 333 followers. It's also retweeted quite a lot, which is good stuff. And essentially the way that the Twitter feed the Twitter feed is updated is I have an account at Google Reader, and I have a link. I have a folder at Google Reader called Pool Blogs. I add the RSS feeds to that folder. That folder generates a public page, which has this Atom feed, and that's the link there. And basically, initially, and this is my preferred option. I basically put the Atom feed into friend feed through this method. hang on. So you basically friend feed, if you don't know, it is like is a way of aggregating all of your social media. So you can add in Flickr, blog posts, Picasa, Facebook, and it basically means you can push them all out into one place. You can follow it like Facebook. You can add friends like Facebook. The thing is, it's quite bland, really. It hasn't been updated for quite a while, but it is very useful for this, which is aggregating the links. And then pushing them through or to updates on Twitter. And so this is the screen that you use on FriendFeed to do that. When FriendFeed goes down, which it does quite a lot, because the problem with the Liverpool blogs